Right now, somewhere in the Persian Gulf, a ship captain is staring at his navigation screen and making the most dangerous commercial decision of his life. Does he sail his oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow, 21-mile-wide choke point that connects the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world, knowing that Iranian drones have already torched 5 vessels in the past week? Or does he turn around, anchor his ship, and wait, joining the 150 other vessels currently stranded, unable to move, unable to deliver their cargo, unable to do anything except bob in the water while the world's energy markets spiral into chaos? That is the real human face of this crisis. Not charts, not barrel prices, not policy statements from Washington. A sea captain, a loaded tanker, a burning strait, and a decision that will affect the price you pay at the gas pump, the cost of groceries on your table, and the heating bill you receive this winter. The Strait of Hormuz. If you've never thought about it before, you need to think about it now. Because what is happening there today is not just a military story, not just an energy story. It is a story about the fragility of the system that powers modern civilization. 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through this one narrow stretch of water every single day. 1/5 of everything. Tankers loaded with crude oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, the UAE, they all funnel through this choke point on their way to refineries in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. There is no backup route. There is no alternative pipeline. There is no plan B. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's single most critical energy choke point, and Iran just closed it. Let that sink in. An Iranian official stood up and said 3 words: the strait is closed. And with those 3 words, he described a situation that has the potential to trigger a global recession, destabilize governments from Tokyo to Berlin to Washington, and send oil prices to levels not seen since the most chaotic days of the 1970s energy crisis. Let's go back to the beginning of this story, because it didn't happen overnight. When Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28, 2026, oil markets began reacting immediately. Before the strikes began, Brent crude, the international benchmark, was trading around $75 a barrel. Not cheap, but stable. Within hours of the first bombs falling on Iran, traders began pricing in what analysts call the disruption premium, the extra cost of uncertainty when a major oil-producing region goes to war. By March 1st and 2nd, just the 2nd and 3rd days of the conflict, something far more serious than an abstract disruption premium was happening. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, began actively attacking commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Persian Gulf. Not just threatening to attack, actually attacking. According to USA Today, at least 5 oil tankers were physically damaged by IRGC drone and missile strikes within the first week of the conflict. Tanker captains began broadcasting distress signals. Insurance companies, which provide the war risk coverage that allows ships to enter conflict zones, began tripling and quadrupling their premiums overnight. Some stopped offering coverage for Hormuz transits entirely. The result was immediate and brutal. Ships stopped going through. Tanker operators looked at the insurance costs, looked at the drone footage of burning vessels, and made a simple business decision. It was not worth it. According to USA Today, 150 ships were stranded, some waiting outside the strait, some anchored in Gulf ports, some simply turning around and heading in the opposite direction. 150 vessels, each one carrying hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil, each one not delivering. Each empty berth at a refinery on the other side of the world represents fuel that isn't being processed, gasoline that isn't being produced, prices that are going up. CNBC reported that U.S. oil prices surged 28% in just days, reaching above $86 a barrel just from the tanker attack fear premium alone. And as the situation escalated, as the strait's closure looked less like a temporary disruption and more like an operational blockade, analysts began warning publicly that we could see $100 a barrel, $110, even $120. On March 7th, a drone strike directly torched an oil tanker inside the strait in what New York Post described as a dramatic confirmation that the blockade was no longer theoretical. It was real. It was operational. And the world was paying attention. Now, at this point in the story, You might be wondering, what is the United States doing about this? The U.S. Navy is the most powerful naval force in human history. It has carrier strike groups, destroyers, submarines, and enough firepower to sink the entire Iranian fleet several times over. Surely the world's greatest navy can keep a 21-mile wide strait open? That is exactly what President Trump said. On March 3, 2026, Trump announced that the U.S. Navy may begin escorting oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. He also said the U.S. government was considering providing war risk insurance directly to tanker operators, essentially having the American taxpayer guarantee that shipping companies wow. Sounds straightforward, right? The Navy escorts the tankers, the oil flows, the prices come down, everyone goes home happy. Except it isn't straightforward. Not even close. CNBC published a detailed analysis with a headline that should give everyone pause. Trump wants Navy escorts for tankers in the Gulf. Why it may not work. And the reasons it may not work are terrifying when you think them through carefully. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow, 21 miles at its tightest point. That sounds like a lot until you realize that in military terms, 21 miles is almost nothing. It is a shooting gallery. The IRGC has spent decades preparing specifically for this scenario. American naval forces trying to push through the strait against Iranian resistance. They have anti-ship missiles. They have swarm drone tactics, dozens of small, cheap drones attacking simultaneously from multiple directions, designed to overwhelm a ship's defensive systems. They have fast attack boats. They have submarines. They have mines. The IRGC's entire asymmetric warfare doctrine is built around one central idea. We cannot defeat the U.S. Navy in a straight fight, but we can make it so painful and so costly to operate in this strait that you will eventually leave. Breaking Defense, one of the most serious military analysis publications in the world, made a stark assessment. Iran could launch an attack that overwhelms U.S. warships' defenses. That is a former military official essentially saying that sending U.S. Navy destroyers to escort tankers through the strait could result in American warships being damaged or sunk. And if that happens, if a U.S. Navy vessel goes down in the Hormuz, we are no longer talking about an oil disruption. We are talking about a direct military escalation that could spiral in directions no one can predict. And here is the geopolitical paradox at the heart of all of this. Donald Trump, who ran on a platform of American energy dominance, who promised to lower oil and gas prices for American families, who staked his economic credibility on keeping energy affordable, is now conducting a war that has sent gas prices surging, blocked the world's most important energy shipping lane, and put American warships in the crosshairs of an adversary that has been preparing for exactly this confrontation for 30 years. The oil price numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. AOL News reported that in a single 24-hour period, oil prices swung from nearly $120 a barrel to $89, a drop of more than $30 in less than a day. What caused that crash? Not a ceasefire, not a military breakthrough, not a diplomatic agreement. Nothing changed on the ground. Strikes continued. Iranian missiles were still flying. The strait was still dangerous. The only thing that changed was a statement from Donald Trump at a press briefing, saying the war would be over very soon. Markets responded to his words as if peace had been declared, which tells you everything you need to know about how the market is pricing this conflict, not on military reality, but on presidential mood. CNN described the oil price shock as something that threatens to hurt Americans where it counts. NBC News ran a detailed analysis titled, "Iran War Threatens Trump's Affordability Push as Rising Energy Prices Compound Pressure." This is the central domestic political problem for the Trump administration. Every day this war continues. Every day the strait is disrupted. Every day oil prices stay elevated. The promise that brought millions of Americans to the polls becomes harder to keep. You cannot tell people you will lower their costs and then start a war that spikes their gas prices. The math doesn't work. And American voters feel it at the pump before they feel it anywhere else. Trump's response has been to argue that the pain is temporary. Quote, from a statement reported by NewsNation, short-term oil prices, which will drop rapidly when the destruction of the Iran nuclear threat is over, is a very small price to pay for peace. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt echoed this message, insisting the spike is temporary and that Trump's broader energy dominant strategy will stabilize markets once the conflict is resolved. But here is the question nobody in the White House is answering. What if it isn't short-term? What if Iran doesn't surrender in weeks? What if the Strait blockade continues for months? What does $120 oil for 6 months do to the American economy? What does it do to European economies that are even more dependent on Gulf energy? What does it do to developing nations in Asia and Africa that have no strategic reserves and no domestic production to fall back on? The winners and losers in this oil war are not evenly distributed. In the short term, Russia and Saudi Arabia are sitting on a gold mine. High oil prices mean their export revenues are exploding even as they produce the same amount. For every dollar oil rises above their production cost, their sovereign wealth funds grow fatter. But there is a catch, and this is something Riyadh is quietly worried about. If oil prices stay too high for too long, they don't just hurt Western consumers. They destroy demand. Recessions reduce oil consumption. A global recession triggered by a prolonged Hormuz blockade could ultimately be worse for Saudi Arabia's long-term oil revenues than a moderate price environment. Saudi Arabia is watching this very carefully, and there are quiet diplomatic discussions happening in Riyadh about how to manage this situation without being seen as either betraying their American ally or allowing their own economy to be destabilized. Europe, as always, is the most vulnerable. The United States has domestic oil production that insulates it from Middle Eastern supply shocks. Europe does not. European nations import the majority of their oil from Gulf producers, and that oil travels through the Strait of Hormuz. Euronews has reported that economists are warning a prolonged conflict could set back European growth forecasts and further squeeze European households, who are still recovering from the energy price shock that followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Europe has already experienced one energy crisis this decade. A second one, caused by an American-led war in Iran, would be politically catastrophic for governments across the continent. There is also the question of Trump's sanctions waiver plan. According to Fortune, as of March 9, Trump was actively considering removing some oil sanctions on Iran as part of a broader strategy to stabilize energy markets while the military campaign continues. This is a remarkable policy contradiction, continuing to bomb Iran while simultaneously lifting the economic sanctions that were supposed to be the primary lever of pressure against the Iranian regime. It reflects the fundamental tension in the entire strategy. You cannot simultaneously pursue a maximum pressure economic war and a maximum force military campaign without those two approaches undermining each other. The sanctions give Iran leverage over its own oil exports. Removing them to stabilize your own domestic energy prices essentially rewards Iran's blockade strategy. The world's most critical energy choke point is under siege tonight. The U.S. Navy is preparing to enter those waters. 5 tankers are already burned. 150 ships are waiting. And oil prices could decide not just the outcome of this war, but the political future of the man who started it, and the economic future of every country that fills its gas tanks, heats its homes, and powers its factories with the oil that is supposed to flow freely and continuously through those 21 miles of contested water. So here is the question I want you to answer today, and I want you to think about it carefully before you drop your response in the comments. If Iran successfully blocks the Strait of Hormuz for more than 2 weeks, triggering a global oil price explosion and pushing the world toward recession, do you think the American public will still support this war? At what point does the economic pain outweigh the stated military objective? Leave your answer below. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really at stake here. And hit that subscribe button, because we are tracking every movement in this strait, every barrel price change, and every decision being made in Washington and Tehran that will determine what you pay the next time you fill up your car.